It probably wouldn't surprise you to know that ever since college days, I've been really interested in magnetic tape, which I used to work with a great deal. And more recently, I've been interested in musical instruments that use magnetic tape as the basis of their sound. Therefore, this video. It's been called the first sampler for its ability to capture and reproduce sounds of musical instruments, voices, and pretty much anything that can be put in front of a microphone. Beloved by many, cursed by some, unknown to others, today we'll discuss the musical instrument named after its inventor, the Chamberlain, and also its rocking British cousin, the Mellotron, and maybe a second cousin or two also. Electronic sampling, that's recording, playing back, and manipulating sounds of a very short duration. It's well known today, and you can find sampling keyboard instruments in many music shops or even the electronics department of a chain store. These instruments use memory chips and computer code, and they've been available since the late 20th century. The creators of early 1980s audio samplers like the Fairlight CMI and the Emulator, they were true pioneers in their young field. Musicians like Stevie Wonder and Kate Bush passionately embraced those early digital devices because they brought new possibilities to music by allowing keyboard players to use sounds never produced by keyboards before. As you may have discerned, dear listeners, this idea was not completely new. Humans have been imitating the sounds around them for hundreds of years, often with help from technology. There's a reason they call it applied science. Well, there was the duck call, and we've all heard the thundering drum. In the 1700s, the wind machine appeared on stages to add atmosphere to Baroque music concerts. But what about actual music performance? Well, the pipe organ and the pump organ were famous for being able to do a fair imitation of other instruments like horns or woodwinds. Silent movie houses in the early 20th century had elaborate organs with all sorts of extras to make silent films more immersive. Immersive sound. Hey, that sounds familiar. Later in the 20th century, electronic organs did some of those same tricks on stage, in studios, or in homes. Some models had built-in rhythm sections sounding, well, not quite like drums and percussion, but maybe close enough. Billy Swan's 1974 hit, I Can Help, featured one of these gadgets. When electronic synthesizers moved from university laboratories into recording studios, some models would learn the art of imitation as well. But they weren't perfect at that task. You could get a Moog, a Prophet, or a Yamaha synthesizer to sound a lot like a windstorm, or maybe like a Hammond organ, but their brass, strings, and piano sounds were not all that convincing. Now, the hero of our story is the inventor of an electromechanical technology that was able to grab and keep sounds, who started working on his project way back in the 1940s. Harry Chamberlain was an electrical engineer and musician. He was probably a classic workaholic who worked on electrical systems for the B-29 bomber during the war, and he also raced speedboats. He was familiar with the ability of tape recorders to preserve the sound of a folk song or a concert on a reel of tape, not being the sticky, invisible, on-the-job kind, but rather a strip of acetate or polyester tape coated with iron oxide. Harry's concept was of a mechanism using a loop of tape or a long strip of tape pre-recorded with a single musical note and controlled by a switch. You press the switch and the note would play until it was switched off or until the tape reached its end. For the idea to become practical for music, a key was used as the switch, and the assembly was duplicated again and again with a different pre-recorded note for each key. Eventually, a musician would have several octaves at their fingertips. The instrument was named a Chamberlain by Harry and his wife, probably because after spending years of 16-hour days perfecting the thing, it seemed like a family member itself. The original machine was built in 1948 with pre-recorded drum sounds, but that one wasn't mass-marketed. The Chamberlains opened a factory in Upland, San Bernardino County, California, a few years later to produce an improved model. The 1950s version of the instrument used pre-recorded sounds of violin, oboe, and flute. According to the French Out of Phase website, the source for those recordings was the Lawrence Welk Orchestra, which 1960s TV viewers would come to know as the Champagne Music Makers. The company marketed their music maker to restaurants and hotels with cocktail lounges, advertising that business would increase 50% if the Chamberlain, with its tape-based library of musical instruments, replaced the piano. Those of you who enjoy side notes would be interested to know that the Mattel Toy Company licensed the same technology for their talking toy dolls in the 1960s.
Actually a Chamberlain, that's what it's called. It's somewhat like the stereo room that I have inside, except that it's preset tapes and materials that are on loops that are consistently turning. And you can hit sounds, and that's one of my favorites. And welcome to the Royal Beach of the Pacific as we slowly sail and dip into the water. Still with us?
In 1965, we had a salesman who sold for us for about a year, Harry later recalled in an interview for the magazine Crawdaddy. Then all of a sudden, he took his demonstrator unit and we never heard from him again. Some accounts say that the man, Bill Franson, was a window cleaner before they hired him as a salesman. Soon after, Bill turned up in England, planning to start his own business far from the reach of the U.S. Patent Office. He connected with an electronics firm called Bradmatic Limited, passing himself off as the inventor. The Bradley brothers of Bradmatic saw the instrument's potential and considered renaming it the Franson after good old Bill, but they settled on the Mellotron as in melody produced via electronics. Not incidentally, one of Bradmatic's employees was a quality control technician and aspiring musician named Mike Pinder, who later joined the Moody Blues. Original customers for the Mellotron included the BBC, which replaced the musical instrument sounds with sound effects for radio and TV production, making it a part of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. The parent company, now called Streetly, discovered Bill's deception when doing a patent search and officially licensed the technology from the Chamberlains going forward. When the portable, luggable is probably more correct, Mellotron 300 and 400 were introduced in the late 60s and early 70s, rock musicians became interested. These instruments were appealing because they allowed musicians to compose, rehearse, and record without the need to keep hiring string and woodwind players to expand their sound. Well, there was another reason for their popularity. The Mellotron and the Chamberlain didn't always quite sound like a string ensemble or a choir of voices, but had an appealing character unique to themselves. As innovative bands like the Moody Blues and King Crimson exploited the Mellotron's sound, its limitations became apparent. The string and choral sounds were often thin, so multiple passes were made in the studio to build up the sound. This process is called overdubbing, and it used up precious space on the master tape. Master tapes in the 1960s typically had only 4 or 8 available tracks to contain voice, guitar, keyboards, etc. But once the overdubs achieved a nice, lush string sound, the recordist would often transfer the result to a completely different reel of tape where it would fill only 1 or 2 tracks, and freeing up space for the artist to continue recording on the empty tracks. The whole recording was then condensed to 2 channels for the then new stereo LP record format, if you could afford a stereo player, that is. The first album from King Crimson used this overdub technique in 1969. When Stephen Wilson and Robert Fripp went back to remix it in the early 2000s, they were able to locate the extra tapes that were used to thicken up the Mellotron and reuse those, so the new 5-channel sound version of the album had Mellotron strings surrounding the listener. Wowie zowie! Meanwhile, the Moody Blues were using the instrument extensively in the studio, taking the extra time to make it sound the best that it could. While on a visit to America, Mike Pinder visited the Chamberlain factory in Upland, California, quite impressed with the improvements Harry had made over the years, including a polyphonic keyboard, more realistic sound samples, and more reliable mechanics. Harry said they simplified the design by eliminating 21 parts per key mechanism.
The Chamberlain is an electromechanical keyboard that utilizes pre-recorded samples on tape to produce sounds. Oh!
Mike purchased 2 of the top-of-the-line machines, and he used them on the Moody Blues' 7th Sojourn album in 1972, as noted in the deluxe SACD edition from Decca that came out in 2007. Streetley's Mellotrons were improved over the years, but remained plagued by breakdowns and foul-ups. Guitarist Steve Hackett was happy to use them while recording, but he didn't dare take one on tour. Rick Wakeman got so frustrated by one model's constant breakdowns that he retired 2 of the instruments by taking them out into an open field and setting them on fire. Rick later rechanneled his negative energy by working on a replacement device which used tape cartridges instead of the complicated springs and arms of the Mellotron. The new machine was called the Birotron. Okay, here's the story of the Birotron. Texas news site Victoria Advocate featured an article on the Birotron, which was invented by David Biro, a musician with no real mechanical background, in his garage in Connecticut. He designed the thing because he didn't want to spend $3,000 in 1980s dollars on a Mellotron. Cobbling together parts from old 8-track tape recorders, Biro managed to create an instrument comparable to the Mellotron, but cheaper and more reliable.
At one point, I knew I needed a keyboard, and you couldn't buy ready-made, keyboards that you could just wire up. So a friend of mine was getting rid of an upright piano, and I talked to all my friends and helped me move it. We dragged the thing over to my house, and I literally chopped it up and just took the middle section of keys, the whole keyboard, just cut it out. And I had this great big mess in the driveway, the soundboard and all the strings and all the wood and everything.
In partnership with Rick Wakeman, only 30 Birotrons were ever mass-produced, if you call that mass. In a recent interview, Rick said he knows of only 6 still existing. Other sources place the number at 4. The Birotron is heard on Rick Wakeman's Criminal Record from 1978. If the original sampler is less well known, it may be because the Musicians Union in America felt that one person at a Chamberlain keyboard kept several others from working, so their rules stated that a Chamberlain player was to be paid at a much higher rate, equal to 3 musicians, understandably discouraging its use. The instrument is rumored to have been used on many albums uncredited, and some musicians who own one of the several models produced over the years keep quiet about it. The Show Must Go On by 70s group Three Dog Night is said to prominently feature Chamberlain sounds. Todd Rundgren had one in his Bearsville recording studio, and it is heard on XTC's 1986 album Skylarking.
Drowning here in summer's cauldron.
Los Lobos put the instrument at the heart of the album Kiko's title song in 1992, originally using one of its more unusual settings on a guide track intended to be just a placeholder for Steve Berlin's saxophone. When Steve heard the weird, warbling 1940s sound of the Chamberlain on the incomplete track, he decided it was perfect the way it was and didn't overdub it. Because the British Musicians Union was more tolerant of the instrument, the Mellotron was produced in greater numbers and its credit list is more official and extensive. Beatles' Strawberry Fields, the Strawbs' Autumn, Genesis' Los Endos, Oasis' Wonderwall, among others, and it's still heard on albums in the 21st century. For commercial-free eclectic music that rocks, it's the Electrical Radio program on 88.1 FM HD3 in Los Angeles or 22westmedia.com anywhere else. Fridays from 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific Time.